All right, so picking up where we left off, this is Kinesiology 223. This is presentation 3B. Where we left off was aggression in sport. And we talked about the one hockey player cross-checking the other one into the boards at the end of a game. Now the book goes into physical and neural bases for aggression. And aggression has been studied in terms of the social sciences, but they talk about the actual physical environment and the neural factors that tie into this. And they note that one study showed that the ambient temperature of all things is related to athlete aggression. Aggression increases as temperature increases. All right, fair enough. With this, Mackay and Associates found that executive function scores were associated with increased aggression in male athletes. It was hypothesized that this association exists because prefrontal lobe deficits in male athletes caused impulse control and difficulties anticipating consequences of aggressive behavior. I would also question what about female athletes as well, but I get it. I get why they're talking about prefrontal lobe in males. Usually it's a correlation in terms of cognitive function and executive function and being able to make well-rounded and well-informed decisions. It's that part of the brain that helps in that process. So I get why they're doing that, and usually that's what they pick on in terms of developmentally between males and females. But I would just say maybe they should also have this regarding female athletes. I think that'd be very interesting, and perhaps if you get into research, that might be something for you to dig into. Athletic performance and aggression. Some coaches and athletes believe that aggressiveness enhances athletic performance at either team or individual level. And I would say it's contextual, depends upon the sport and depends upon the position. It depends upon the culture of the team as well. But I will tell you, for some sports, you have to have a level of aggressive behavior to be able to increase your performance. Now, it can't be negative aggression. It has to be on the positive side of the spectrum. And it does increase performance outcomes, that is for sure. But the challenge is trying to differentiate between the positive aggressiveness or assertiveness behaviors that help influence performance and then minimize the negative aggressive behaviors that can take away from performance or distract from performance. So an athlete can be coached to have greater self-awareness, and I said this earlier, regarding what is aggressive and what is assertive, but an athlete can also have and be coached to have greater self-awareness regarding how to self-regulate when they start to recognize the fact that they're going from an assertive behavior or positive aggressive behavior into, and they're being drugged into somebody else's game of chatter, name calling, etc., and they're being taken out of the ability to perform. So it's something where as a coach you have to kind of prep your athletes for this. So that you kind of have to look at it and go, what is the value proposition in terms of what is my enhanced performance at what cost of aggression? So you're going to have positive aggression and negative aggression, and it's kind of hard to differentiate them. They run together, but as a coach or an athlete, you have to be able to differentiate one from the other and realize, well, God, this guy's taking me out of my game. I need to really redirect my focus into being more assertive in my play or having positive aggression as opposed to this negative aggression that's happening right now. Team morale and atmosphere, I can't speak this enough in terms of team atmosphere and how a team is run, and a team culture comes right from the coach. So if you're going to get into coaching, you're going to have to drive the bus on this. And if team norms are accepting or supportive of aggressive behavior, especially negative aggressive behavior, the athlete will socialize to the norm and the team will become more aggressive, thereby causing this negative cycle. So in this study, they talk about aggressive tendencies in young basketball players included perceptions of their teammates' aggressive behaviors in the same situation and their willingness to injure others at their coach's request. You're going to be a hitman on the floor. So if you're going to be an enforcer, right? So Steffens and Bredmeyer showed that athlete aggressiveness is influenced by team norms and perceptions of aggressiveness, as well as coach support for such norms. Chow and colleagues found that the team norms for aggression predicted the likelihood that youth soccer players would be aggressive. So I speak back to that young lady who was grabbing the ponytail of her opponents and yanking them down and straining their neck. I don't know for sure if that was something that was part of the team culture or was generally accepted by the coach, but the fact that the behavior happened and was a behavior that was ongoing with that young athlete, one can make the presumption that it was generally accepted by her peers on the team and also generally accepted by her coach because the coach did nothing to stop the behavior. It was implied it was okay. So the coach and teammates play an especially important role in creating team morale atmosphere that influences aggression in athletes. That young lady could have been perhaps redirected by her peers or her coach. So more sports specific, they talk about in addition to general theories of aggression, researchers have made numerous sport-specific examples for aggression as early as 2001. Specifically, athletes behave aggressively because someone has committed aggression against them. We've talked about that. The opposition has annoyed them. We've talked about that. They're highly ego-oriented and have a low level of moral development. We have talked about that a couple times. They want to show how tough they are. They believe it's part of their role, and they feel the group pressures to be aggressive. Now, another finding has been that the more frequently teams compete with each other, the more likely to be aggressive. That's very much like the Packers and Bears. And I will just point out that in the context of the rules of the game, if you're somebody that can go out, be assertive, positive, aggressive, and when somebody doesn't play by the rules and you're able to basically, within the context of the rules, dominate your opponent, that will be way more demoralizing for your opponent than your opponent calling your mother names. 100%. So you have to learn how to play within the context of the rules and just be physically dominant on your opponent. So gender and cultural differences. Males tend to have higher frequencies of aggression. Authors present an interesting point regarding athletes from China. Now, over here, if we go into this, found that experiences of aggression in Chinese athletes were similar to those in Western populations in many ways. However, Chinese athletes remunerated or thought about their aggression more, suggesting that members of a collective culture are less likely to accept aggression as a means of goal achievement. So as the Chinese athletes remunerated or reflected upon their aggression, and perhaps there was an intervention that they're not speaking about here as a result of that, maybe a self-regulation intervention, they're overall as a culture less likely to accept somebody else's aggression as a means to the end. So meaning I'm investing my time in myself. I have interventions to minimize my possibility of being aggressive. Therefore, you as my teammate should also exhibit the same behavior. They were holding each other accountable in that cultural norm. The idea is the reflection and the action of remuneration. The remuneration itself is the reflection and the action allows them to hold others more accountable. And they hold others more accountable because they hold themselves more accountable. And that's a cultural thing. That's a cultural thing that we cultivated on a team. Alcohol-related aggression in sport. So I talk about alcohol in sports participation, and it's pretty robust across all cases. Now, the social aspect of being on a team can exacerbate the desire to socialize and drink when not at practice or play. And where I think this is awkward is, the book starts to kind of, as they're doing this list here, they're kind of going through a hodgepodge of different things. And part of it seemed to be very much environmental in terms of you go to play in an environment and you have in the stands people who are drinking, and as a result, they become more aggressive in the stands towards the players. But then they talk about the relationship between alcohol, sports participation, and aggression and violence appears to be relatively robust across all studies. And what I'm reading into this is that you have this alcohol aggression, but I don't know too many players who are on the field playing a sport who have been drinking. So I'm left to presume that they're talking about either people in the stands who are heckling the players, or they're talking about the overall culture of a team that they have in terms of the athletes get together and they engage in heavy binge drinking and extreme alcohol consumption because they spend their time socializing. So it kind of runs in terms of, they kind of blur the lines on this and what they're trying to present to us. But I think there's validity to both of these in terms of, we've already talked about the misuse of alcohol. We talked about how you have this cultural norm on the team itself, where on days off or on the weekends, perhaps a college team might go out and go to the bars or go drinking, etc. But you also have to understand that there's alcohol-related aggression from the fans to the participants in the sport. And I don't think they did a really good job here in this part of the chapter defining that. I wish they would have done a little bit better because there's a cultural component to that. All right, guys, I'm signing off from this presentation. I'm going to move on to the next.